Good morning. Happy New Year. We will go ahead and call this January 1st, 2024 special session of Norwood City Council to order. Please rise for a moment of reflection and a pledge of allegiance. Thank you. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this moment, I would ask Ms. Royce if you can serve as Clerk of Council Pro Tem until we appoint the Clerk of Council in the order on the agenda. We have already all council members, as well as other elected city officials have already signed and been administered their oaths of office. So we will continue with the roll call of all elected officials.
Ms. Range.
Here.
Ms. Hoover.
Here.
Ms. Royce. Ms. Boland. Here. Mrs. Winterbauer. Here. Mr. Gurdon.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mayor Schneider.
Here.
Auditor. Oh, sorry. Keith Moore.
Here.
Mr. Mayor.
Here.
Mr. Watson.
Here. Next item is to appoint a clerk of council. We will open up the floor for nominations. Mrs. Hoover?
I nominate Natalie Assoff.
Any other names for clerk of council? Okay. Mrs. Hoover nominates Natalie Assoff. Is there any second? Mrs. Franzen?
I second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Ranske.
Yes.
Ms. Hoover.
Yes.
I vote yes. Ms. Boland.
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer.
Yes.
Mr. Gurdon.
Yes.
Mr. Brady.
Yes, ma'am. All members present voting aye. Ms. Assoff, if you want to assume the seat up here as clerk of council and All right, the next item on the agenda is to appoint a president pro tem. Mrs. Franzen.
I nominate Susan Hoover.
All right. Mr. Braden? I'll second. Second? Okay, the motion is to nominate Mrs. Hoover as president pro tem with the second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Ranson?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Ms. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gurdon?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am. All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is to appoint a clerk of council pro tem. Mrs. Hoover?
I nominate Alexis Royce.
Motion is to nominate Alexis Royce as clerk of council pro tem. Mrs. Winterbauer,
I second.
second. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Burton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is to appoint a secretary to the clerk of council. But as you may be aware, this role is currently a shared full-time position with the HR director. So the assumption here is that we will continue that if there is a motion to do so. Mrs. Hoover?
I make a motion that we continue to use the shared position as our secretary to the clerk of council.
Seconded by Mrs. Winterbauer. Any discussion? Okay, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Burton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Next on the agenda is enact a standing rules of council. Everyone should have received those via email. There are also printed out copies for everyone this morning as well. Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that we receive and enact the new rules of council.
Okay. Motion by Mr. Brady to receive and enact the standing rules of council. Is there a second? Mrs. Franklin?
I second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Burton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is the consideration of council member assignments to committees. Again, those were also sent via email, and printed copies were provided to everyone this morning to review. Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that we receive and enact the new committees of council.
Okay, thank you. Motion by Mr. Braden to receive and enact the assignments to committees for council. Second by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Burton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item on the agenda is to appoint or self-nominate the OKI Board of Directors representative. Mrs. Hoover?
I would like to appoint myself to stay on the OKI committee as representative for Norwood.
Thank you. Mrs. Franson?
I second.
Thank you. Motion by Mrs. Hoover to remain the OKI representative, seconded by Mrs. Franson. Any discussion? Okay, call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Burton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. Next item is the appointment of an Energy Improvement District Board member. Mrs. Franson?
I'll nominate myself.
Ms. Royce?
I'll second.
Motion by Mrs. Franzen to serve as the appointment to the Energy Improvement District Board, seconded by Ms. Royce. Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen,
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover,
Yes.
Ms. Royce,
Yes.
Ms. Bowling,
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer,
Yes.
Mr. Burton,
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting yes, the motion carries. We have no absent members. Just a reminder to anyone watching, we will have an inauguration ceremony taking place in around 55 minutes. With that, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Mrs. Winterbauer,
I motion that we adjourn.
second. Ms. Royce,
I'll second.
call the roll, please.
Mrs. Franzen?
Yes.
Mrs. Hoover?
Yes.
Ms. Royce?
Yes.
Ms. Bowling?
Yes.
Mrs. Winterbauer?
Yes.
Mr. Gruden?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. All members present voting yes. This special meeting of Norwood City Council is hereby adjourned.